Hello there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is our Ethiopia Today podcast. As always, I am back again with the one and only Mr. Faisal. We are going to dissect the contemporary issues pertaining to Ethiopia and the Horn of Africa by zooming in on the macroeconomic policy shifts which has been made by the Ethiopian government and its potential and real ramifications for the social and political landscape of Ethiopia. And we will touch up on some political issues as well, including the Ethiopia-Somalia relationship, whether it is improving or deteriorating, whether we have any signals these days. But before that, I would like to welcome Mr. Faisal. It is always a pleasure talking to you. Good to see you back.
Thank you, Mogas. Same here. Equally very happy to be with you again.
All right, I will try to cut the crap and make my points and the questions very straight to save our time. And as always, it is going to be a very short podcast. And with that, I would like to start with the macroeconomic shift, which have received a much of fanfare, not from the opposition political group or even from those to be heard going to shoulder the burden of economic implications. Nevertheless, media landscape, including the international media platforms, have been discussing about why Ethiopia accepted the terms and the conditions of the IMF, whether this policy shift is homegrown, as it has been alluded to, or whether this is basically the structural adjustment in the 21st century. We'll discuss about all of that. But how did you see the news, and were you surprised? Let's begin with that.
No, in a way, I was not surprised, given the fact that Mogas for the last 2 years, if not more, but I would say for the last 2 years, Ethiopia has been negotiating with the World Bank and the IMF. You could recall the number of times that Ethiopian minister for economic minister and bankers came to Washington to back and forth and negotiate with IMF and the US government in the background and World Bank. And although we were never told exactly how those conversations were taking place, but nonetheless, this was a journey on both sides to really negotiate on what I would call, and the right terminology, despite what Addis Ababa would be calling Ethiopia's debt relief package. And they can say homegrown economic system that the Ethiopian government forwarded to IMF or the World Bank, and we can go in detail later on. But from the days of negotiation all the way down to 2 weeks ago, when the two announced the agreement, this was the journey that many countries take when they are when they're seeking debt relief. The difference is most countries, lately Somalia, which has been devastated by civil war, was in the open telling the public what they call in Somali language, the or forgiving or debt forgiveness, which is not, that's not the right word, but it's debt relief. And when people hear the word relief, they assume that the debt has been wiped out from that country in a new chapter. No, it's just a restructuring of the mounting debt that these countries have. So the question is, would they pay all the debt that they owe to World Bank, IMF, and other creditors today? Will they pay this in 20 years? And if they pay, how do you restructure the interest rate? The interest rate that they had when they took the loan, which was probably high, versus potentially renegotiating the interest rate now so that they can pay slowly. In which case, there are a number of agreements and conditionalities that come with that package, in which case, if you accept that, then the debt would be restructured. So the program that we are looking is neither debt relief nor anything. It's not something that Ethiopian people should be completely happy about it. It's an issue that should be debated depending on what type of economic philosophy and national independence one wants to have, but it is nothing close to debt relief or wiping out Ethiopia's debt, giving Ethiopia free money. No.
Interesting. So let's hear from the horse's mouth, which means the prime minister. He said three important things. First of all, on the national TV, they said, congratulations to the Ethiopian people. Now we are going to start a new era of hope and prosperity. Two, he said, why should you be surprised? And we have been paving the way over the last 3 years, which I agree with. And it's just because of our ignorance, complete ignorance, that we were not seeing the tsunami coming. So he was right in this regard. But and then lastly, he said, we are making a radical departure. That is confided in a letter he supposedly penned for his brother in Washington, D.C., the president of the World Bank. So is there anything to celebrate? You have already answered part of the question, but in light of what the prime minister has said and all the fanfares which is going on in the streets and the media, Ethiopian media, why are we celebrating, and what are the cause for concerns?
Yes, and I read that letter that you shared with me, and I think it was on your show, Mogus, that I shared with you about 2 or 3 weeks ago when I said I side with the Ethiopian government on the issue of pushing back on the IMF and the World Bank. If you recall a few weeks ago, where I was saying on that issue, simply because the net result of the program that we are discussing may not bode well for Ethiopian masses. And I will say several factors as to why. First of all, Ethiopia has, and I'll come back to this letter, which is a response to some of the conditionalities that the IMF World Bank put forth before they restructure the debt. I think one, Ethiopia has always cashed on the aura of being an independent African country, the only African country that was not colonized. That's number one. And number two, I think, that it has been resisting. The Ethiopian people were told that Ethiopia has been asking the World Bank and IMF on its terms, give us the money. That's what we were told. And then the third is, as you said, one is this macroeconomic policy, as they call it, was adapted. Prime Minister Abiy said, brace for new era, and we will talk about what that new era is. I think, realistically speaking, one of the products of the IMF/World Bank, and there are a lot of arguments, but in general, for the third world historical perspective, and we can address that, accepting IMF World Bank restructuring and macroeconomic policy shift is tend to amount to giving a stake of Ethiopia's macroeconomic policy formulation to IMF and World Bank. Not 100% give it, but they are partners today. Ethiopia is no longer the sole manager of the Ethiopian economy, period. Ethiopia will be sharing its policies and management of the economy, how to levy taxes, how to do poverty reduction programs, how to reform the banks, how to reform the other sectors of economy, such as factories and what have you. From now on, with the structural adjustment acceptance, Ethiopia is no longer 100% independent from the normative explanation point of view. No longer 100% independent. They will consult with every move that impacts the Ethiopian airlines, the Ethiopian telecommunication, the Ethiopian banking system, the Ethiopian agricultural investment with IMF and World Bank, because the money that they are asking is no longer coming from Ethiopia. And in that letter you just shared with me this morning, of the 9 or 10 factors that the letter looks at, one of the issues is that fiscal space for Ethiopia has been narrowing because of 2 factors, the letter says. One is that taxes have been declining because of the wars, although they are not mentioning. And the second one is development assistance has not been coming to us. And development assistance doesn't come from the lady in Mekelle or the lady in Gondar or the man in Jigjiga. This money comes from a package of USAID, EU, what have you, in which case the more they give that, in addition to the structuring of the debt, the more the national autonomy, and this is not only for Ethiopia, indeed for most African countries, the space for national autonomy is narrowing. So I think when you look at the debt relief package, and if you allow me later on, we can go over it, they are about 10 factors that the World Bank puts in place, and one of those is showing World Bank how Ethiopia would be willing to reduce what they call poverty reduction. How are you going to approach your poverty reduction? And this letter in itself addresses poverty reduction in so many ways, including, quote unquote, expanding electrification of Ethiopia for the poor. And they have been talking about this for how many years, and it's never there. But you have to show on paper that you are showing the World Bank and IMF the steps that you will be taking in order to qualify. So this letter basically was to say that we accepted the debt relief conditions, which are about 10, 11 of them, and one of them is the poverty reduction, and we are on our way to agree with you, World Bank and IMF, and we will do that. So basically, for the public of Ethiopia, this is, and we can talk about from historical perspective, it's nothing but probably more cleavage of the class expanding. Very few people who will take advantage of the banking system that's supposed to be receiving more dollars from the package will really benefit from it, but the average person will be struggling with the oil price going up and theft skyrocketing and onion being out of the reach of the public. And this paradigm that we started will be with the people for a long time, and they will be struggling for many years, and the government will not be in a position to solve. And that's what Kenya is now struggling. Despite that its currency is not an issue, we've been told quite a lot about the narrowing the gap between the birr and the dollar. That's only a small part of the conditionality in which the country accepted. And even after you accept and you really chase the dollar to make viable for people to go to the bank and get more currency, it doesn't really trickle down to the poverty reduction, and that's the revolt that you see in Kenya today.
Excellent. I will also come back to its socio-political implications. But before that, let me add one important issue which I just missed from the Prime Minister's recent speech while he was, again, lecturing the high-ranking government officials. He said, word for word, that the president of the World Bank is a friend of Ethiopia, and the president of the IMF loves Ethiopia and the Ethiopian people. Does the international in this financial institution function that way? What has love got to do with the terms and the conditions of the loan? I mean, that is what he said publicly on the state media. So with that, why is Ethiopia accepting the IMF and the World Bank in essence?
Well, the Ethiopia is accepting the World Bank. They are not friends, and he should never have really used that. He should have really addressed it more officially, because the World Bank president works for the shareholders of the banks and the IMF, and he's at their whim, and they are out there to make profit. Every dollar that you see should come back to the bank with $50 as a net. They have to make. I think in terms of how to read what this would be, I think Africa's history just tells us that, as I said earlier, there is no single country that can today stand at the AU chamber and say we benefited from the World Bank IMF program. None whatsoever. You can literally go through the literature and everything. Now, countries like Somalia that has collapsed, whose currency went out of the picture, whose economic functionality has disappeared, has no other option, Mogus, but to throw themselves at the footsteps of the World Bank leaders and say, we are ready of, to satisfy every condition that you put. Ethiopia was not like that, but Ethiopia was also on the verge. I think it's a recognition by both Ethiopia and the World Bank and IMF that if things are not done, the state could collapse because there was no currency to buy. As you know, $16 billion is needed annually for Ethiopia to import the goods that they want, including fertilizers and everything. And that $16 billion was not in the bank. So they needed somebody to bring some money into the bank so that less they can buy medicine and oil and other food and what have you. So I don't know if I addressed your question, but I think there is the social upheavals and the social challenges here is there. In terms of why the World Bank and IMF at this point accepted to restructure Ethiopia's debt, I think Ethiopia accepted, not the other way. See, people are just, in my opinion, and when you read the conditions, and if you allow me, I will just quickly go over the conditions that World Bank, accepts. But number one, I think it requires that you have to be eligible for World Bank and International Monetary package. And that package is a combination of loan and grants, but all of them to be paid back to the World Bank. The country should be facing unsustainable burden of it repaying its debt. The poverty reduction has not worked until now. So Ethiopia is required to show that. Ethiopia also needs to establish systemic record of its statistics and how it does business. It's required to restructure its banking system. It's required to also restructure its investment style. It's also required to open private sector to bid and own some of the nationally owned economic sectors. So all those are the package that Ethiopia will accept now. When it accepts that, definitely the country should be braced for a complete change of how things have been up to this point, including the salaries that people are paid now should be consulted with IMF and World Bank, because World Bank and IMF would not want salaries to go up or the employment levels to go up. So Ethiopia will have only two ways to go: to reduce the number of people who work in the sectors that are key to the economy and pay a little higher than those small number, or expand the number of people who get employment through the government structures and what have you, but pay probably okay. I think the World Bank will dictate to Ethiopia to reduce significantly the number of people employed in the public sector as well as in the quasi private partner, private public partner kind of factories, or even Ethiopian Airlines, Ethiopian Electric, companies. All those are subject to the prescriptions and bitter pill that World Bank and IMF would require. So the the Ethiopians who already were unemployed will not be impacted, except life would be expensive. But those who had jobs, whether through government system or through big factories, have to be braced for hardship times, because the one thing that IMF World Bank right away in the structural adjustment program require is to reduce the expenditure of the government, so that revenue collected or aid given or loan given to Ethiopia only finances a small number of workforce. And that would be the heaviest impact people would see.
That is the point I was about to ask you. So then there is a euphemism which is well known, that the rich gets richer and the poor gets poorer. And in this case, who are the losers and who are the profiteers in this fiasco? Because you have already touched up on some of the issues.
So I mentioned the Somalia experience in 1986, after the Ethiopia-Somalia war finished, and then Somalia wanted to recover from the debt, what have you. That was the first time it accepted the structural adjustment moves. That money that came to Somalia as a form of new loan and restructuring literally largely went into the hands of cronies, rich folks who were close to the administration. And it's very interesting to know that the rich neighborhood established in Mogadishu at the time was nicknamed by the masses Boli Qaran. Boli means money stolen, and Qaran means nation. Stolen money's neighborhood. It was just an exclusive neighborhood where, in the midst of poverty, these cronies imported maids from the Philippines. Imagine Somalis importing maid to work in their house and teach their kids the English language in private setting in this exclusive neighborhood. I am afraid the same thing would be replicated in Ethiopia, but it happened also in Kenya. In the second reiteration of Ruto's members of the executive, when they were to be sworn in again in front of the parliament, they were asked to, say how much worthy they are. The least minister was worthy of, and I calculated, 60 million US dollars. That was the lowest. Some of them were in the neighborhoods of 200 million US dollars. These are ministers in African country in the midst of people revolting for the rise of price for bread. So in the case of Ethiopia, we have to be prepared. If we were looking at during the EPRDF, that there was a small number of people who were rich and the rest were not. Now that would be an acute factor. Yeah, I mean acute angle kind of thing, where a small number of people will be richer, and those are the people who have accounts with the bank. Those are the ones who are already admitted to keep some of the money that they exchange with the bank and import whatever they want and set the price. Those would be richer. But the majority of people, particularly urban poor, Addis Ababa, Daredawa, Bahir Dar, Nakamt, those where you have concentration of urbanized people who depended on this, modern economy would be impacted. The rest, they have already been impacted by the wars, by the lack of production of teff or wheat or what have you, maize. So I think Ethiopia is at a conundrum at this point in time. And this World Bank IMF package, in my opinion, unless there is a very serious mitigation program is advised by patriotic national agenda, if you leave it the way it is now, which I'm afraid it would, because the government that didn't care about, its people dying in the multiple wars that we have had since 2020, I don't think they will be that much hurt by people getting poor. Mogus, look at what happened in the last few years. A significant number of the housing stock of Addis Ababa have been gutted, with the intention that those people will be homeless or they will be displaced. There was no contingent plan to house the people that have been gutted. About 22 mosques have been destroyed. Many historical legacies, whether one person likes it or not, have been destroyed in Addis Ababa. On top of that, you have the 1 million died in the war. You have the Amara war now going on. You have the Oromo war that's going on for the last 6 years. Where is that responsibility that somebody says, I will make sure that the kid who is sleeping on the corner of Gion Hotel in Addis Ababa will not go hungry, when we have this thing? The government of Ethiopia cannot prove to us that it will protect the people from the World Bank and IMF vagaries who are usually covered. It's not like a serious direct affront. It's really a sophisticated way of slow process of undermining the economies of the masses. And then by the time you realize it's too late, and you have conditions like Zimbabwe where the money is no longer significant. And I think I will say harder times are ahead.
Yeah, I can't agree more on that. I think I remember, if I am not misquoting, the former South African, I think it's Thabo Mbeki, or the other guy, no, Desmond Tutu. He said that an island of few rich surrounded by the ocean of poverty can never be sustained. I think that is what he said. And precisely that is what is going to happen when the few who are already the cronies of the international transnational organized, I would say, looters, are amassing what is remained of the country, and then the people, the vast majority of the people who are hurt by the economic fallout are dispersed and they are not responding. As to those people who are already facing the brunt of economic hardship, it is only compounding, as you said. It's just adding additional layer to that. Let me share another letter with you, which proves what you said. Today, that you know him very well, the Ministry of Education, the Minister, Professor Branu Naga, issued a letter warning the Association of the Higher Education Teachers, saying that there won't be a salary increment, and what you have been seeing is a fake news. Even so, they have to wait until next September. They will hold the discussion in 2017 Ethiopian calendar. If not, they said that they are going to take drastic measures against the teachers and the associations. That this is a letter issued by him in Amharic. So this is already telling us that something is brewing, already boiling up, and they are also resorting to the usual tactic, right? To the low-hanging fruit of intimidating any voices out there. What do you make of that?
Absolutely. I mean, for Burhanu, who is an economist, to have been so quiet is really a travesty, in the sense that he sees and he probably understands more than those young people who have been trained to just work for the government in the last 30 years since EPRDF came. And those are the people who are really leading now, but with all due respect to Burhanu, I think it's very disappointing for him to have presided over the ministry at all this time, and now just throwing little words here and there, as opposed to really saying what it is. See, Mogus, since the 1940s, 50s, I would say 49, 50s, third world countries have been debating, and Burhanu knows this very well. And I think Ethiopian economists and rural development experts have participated in the discussion quite a lot. I remember in the 80s and 90s when this debate was thriving among third world countries and African scholars as to what does economic development mean for our people. And many Ethiopian scholars hang on to that concept and really defend it in a way. That's why, the 1960s, riots and student movement all had roots in this re-examining of what Africa, Ethiopia should be in light of the Western dominance. So many Latin American scholars way back in the 40s and 50s realized that the Western economic system does not work for newly independent countries, including Ethiopia, which was never colonized, but in the same situation as the rest of these countries. So the debate started, and literally, if I just shorten a long history, how do we de-link our economic development philosophy with that of the West, which doesn't give any credence to protecting the poor? I mean, you go to New York and you see a lot of it. So how do we come up with an economy that takes advantage of technologies and what have you, but at the same time don't subject our economy to Washington, D.C. and New York and what have you? And I think that debate was there for a long time. And in the last few years, we have been losing ground. Now, on the other side, the newly industrialized countries, the NICs, the Asian tigers, benefited that debate simply because the West didn't treat them the same way that they treated Africa, I would argue. And there's significant literature on this. And I think with the Asian tigers, they let them take the technology and the money without subjecting them to have policies descending from Washington, D.C. and New York. So they take the money, they loan, take the loan, and then they do whatever they have to do. And I'm saying this simply because, Mogus, when Ghana became independent in 1960s, Ghana and South Korea were neck to neck in terms of actually Ghana was a little bit advanced. But when they came to Africa with the third world policies, they subjected our natural way of growing to Washington and New York policy, and that is still there. So I think with the Mullah's era, there was a mix. They were taking a little bit here and there, but they were pushing back, and they were trying their best to the extent possible to protect what they call poverty reduction mechanisms. They protected that. I think what the current situation tells us is that we completely accepted the World Bank and IMF formula to 100%, including potentially selling some of the most successful Ethiopian economic sectors. I am very suspicious as to why in the last minute President Biden signed that letter of commendation. I don't want to be cynic, but signed that letter of congratulating Ethiopian Airlines as a successful case study for the economic system of Ethiopia. Indeed, it's the most successful enterprise that we can see in Africa now. Are there eyes on the Ethiopian Airlines because the telecom is gone? Some factories are now being subjected to being sold, or at least made shareholding with outside entities. I'm not sure. I don't want to feel or sound cynical, but that's not out of the question also. To encourage Ethiopia's economy in its entirety to be placed on the table for partnership. And that formula since the 1950s has not worked for the third world. Neither did it work after the 1960s for Africa. And I think Ethiopia was one of the very few countries under Derg and Haile Selassie, under Meles Zenawi. Yes, getting mixed up with the Western system of bank loans and what have you, but some protection was in place. Whether those protections will be there today to safeguard the interests of the mass and the poor people, I am not sure. And I'm saying this because I've been studying lately the quote unquote corridor development. We can talk about that some other time since that's a field that I know very well. But that is also a sign for me where the government has moved to satisfy the urban sector and a small urban sector, not the whole Addis Ababa. Addis Ababa has 5 million people, if not more, but a small pocket is of the people of Addis Ababa to enjoy this luxurious life that looks like Dubai, whereas the rest are losing their houses, their livelihood, their transportation systems. And, to me, I think this is a typical product and byproduct of World Bank and IMF, even before we even started the full package.
So with that, do you see any social movement or resistance, perhaps uprising in the near future? Is it in sight? Because in Kenya, and it is a direct reaction to the IMF conditionalities. Even in Bangladesh, we have something which is indirectly related to that. A year ago in Sri Lanka, it was about the debt trap, which brought the country to its knees. So do you see, based on your assessment, that these generations of Ethiopians would somehow react to this economic hardship and perhaps the economic crisis leading to social crisis, and then that ultimately impacting upon the political issues?
Yeah, so the economic crisis we have seen, and it has been lingering around, devaluation, and all this have been with us for a while now, and the price of simple livelihood for people have been getting difficult. It's very interesting. Bread and butter issues are very touchy for the masses. I mean, in Nigeria, they're talking about where is the fufu. In Kenya, they were talking about the bread. The same with the Arab Spring, if you recall, when they touched the bread issue, it rose. In Somalia, after that adjustment I discussed with you, there was an entire revolutionary song called Mufo. Mufo is Mogadishu injera. It's like a thick bread. So Mufo, where is the Mufo? Where is the Mufo? And that was the debacle of Ziad Barre, to be honest with you. I was talking to an Ethiopian who knows this issue very well, and he said Ethiopians have, in terms of, coming down from crisis to crisis. First they eat the meat, then the beans, then the injera, then the dried injera. So now it looks like people are descending to the lowest in terms of availability of what they can eat, as we hear. I think this has a potential to really create social unrest and a revolt against the government, provided that there are people who are organizing, particularly Gen Z, through the mass media, through the, Ethiopia is a little bit different than some of the African countries, in the sense that it has this feudal cultural strict system, but at the same time we have seen Egypt in herself, where people just exploded one time. Egypt and Ethiopia share a lot of ancient historical system of governance. I would not rule out the fact that people will really say enough is enough. The only issue I'm not sure about is how leadership can emerge from this. And really, we have armed groups who are fighting. They are on the outskirts and the periphery, and governments have a lot of tolerance to wars that take place in the periphery, regions. Somalis have been fighting with the central government for ages. TPLF has started fighting with this current government, and you know the result. Fano is fighting, although it's creating momentum. The same with Oromo Liberation Army. So there is a stamina, there is some stomach to bear the periphery wars. But if Addis Ababa, along with Redawa and Bahir Dar, if the youth organizes and those who are hungry rise up and demand the legitimate issues without picking up the guns, I think the government either will change its direction or it may listen to those people. If not, we have seen what happened in Bangladesh. A simple, small policy stirred up the festered anger and grievances that people have. And no person is today more angrier, as I said, angrier than people who live in Addis Ababa, in Bahrar, in Rerewa, and everywhere. But particularly, Addis Ababa is a place to be watched. If they can find a system to organize the youth through the social media, then I think Abiy has his homework cut out for a while.
Well, thanks so much. So with that, let's move to another related issue. So I know that even the economic policy is the hot potato of the day. We cannot finish discussing about this murky issue. We'll come back to it, and it remains to be seen. But for me, even though a public unrest and a potential civil movement might not be likely, but in any case, the social and economic and political impact is huge, and I can see it, I can feel it. So, and we will see, and we'll come back to it in a couple of weeks. And let's move to the political aspect of the matter within the remaining hours we have. So the Fano movement seems to have been stalled owing to primarily three reasons: military fatigue, fragmentation of the movement, and the leadership crisis. And the most notable one being the division between the two groups as they were trying to form one umbrella organization. I think you are familiar with that. On top of that, we have seen, since we have met last time, that one top military commander, General Tafarra Mamo, joined. And from the political wing, we have Mr. Gadu Andargacho, who made a recent move to work with the Fano. And he wrote a very extended Amharic letter. And how do you assess this development within Fano, and what potential implication it might have for the Ethiopian politics?
Yeah, I think the fact that Gedun Dargacho, whose name appears on many stationaries in Ethiopia at higher levels, came out and literally said, pronounced the prime minister a man with blood in his hands. You cannot go more radical than that. And then you write, Colonel Mamo and others. So the Fano, if not the Fano, the Amhara movement has taken shape. It has been taking shape because today, if you look at who is in the scene of the Amhara leadership, you cannot compare Gedwin Dargacho and where he stands with the Amhara region vis-a-vis Daniel Kibret, because Abiy has Daniel Kibret. So it's up to the people to really say who has more. But in my opinion, as an outsider, I think Geddu has more weight, no matter what he did in his flirtation and working with Prime Minister Abiy. But his just resume goes farther than this fiddler, I call it. Kibret is just when Abiy says jump, he says how high, with no knowledge, with no expertise in governance, what have you. You know, the challenge with the Amara movement and the division, you say, I agree with you. Fatigue is there and fragmentation is there. Very strong personalities are there, as you could see them now hitting each other. But I think the greater picture of what you see with the Amara fragmentation and lack of cohesion reflected on all groups. And, whether it is the Somali group, the Amara group, the Oromo group, and I attribute this to several factors, but one factor, Mogus, is that I'm of the opinion that after the Derg took power, systemically, Ethiopian people's struggles have been deprived of the ideology that they used to struggle together. Not that I have, sentimental memories about the 1960s and 70s, which I was not even there as a young kid, but the very fact that they had, whether that was a fashion at that time or not, they had a methodology and well orchestrated thinking, some original, some imported, to unite the person who is in Godey versus the person who is in Godar and the one in Magale and the one in Nagamte on belief system, beliefs, not to be completely one people, but to agree on basic human, social, political, economic ideas and fight oppression. Later on, they can settle the issue the way they want. That was something that they constructed, that generation. With the Derg, and after the Derg and the recent revisionists who you have seen in the last 2 years, especially when the 50th anniversary of the Derg was to be celebrated, all those people who made a fortune about blaming everything that united the people on the so-called national question or secession or this, although that was one issue, but they completely undermined what brought different Ethiopians on one gabata, if you will, on one bowl, so that they can think together, argue together, resolve issues. That has been lost. And now, what do you have? You have all these groups who are fighting on one agenda, and even within that one agenda, they don't agree for a long period of time. That's a very, very dangerous. The first thing you need to create for a country to fight together on some oppressive system is to bring them on a, you know, plain field where they have one belief system to struggle together. That's lost. I think as long as you don't have that, people will be further divided, and for the government, it would be easier. It's not really sentimental to say that, the Walala in time, and I mean, to critique a system and say we need a solution, but to completely come into a struggle. I mean, what's the unity now between the Amara Fano group and the Tigray group and the Oromo group and the Somali group? Nothing. At least at that time they were united. There were differences. People misunderstand it. There were differences. I remember as a young people coming to circles and arguing even on books that were talking about unity versus lack of unity. And then they depart and then they come back. And let me just say this, just not sentimentally, but I remember in Mogadishu when a lot of EPRP people come to Mogadishu, and were just with young Somali men and women who were also from the same region, like Jijiga and stuff like that. The unity of ideology was what was uniting them, not ethnicity, not where they came from, not where they were feeling. Some Somalis had relatives with the government of Ziad Barre at the time, but they were coming to their friend, it's called it Bari Jabuti, where the Habasha and other Ethiopians were there and will protect them and discuss them. I think more energy is needed at this point in time to really spend as to how to bring people on one ideology so that they can think alike, as opposed to this fragmented.
I completely agree with you with the last point that you brought in, because the lack of ideology, unifying ideology, in part led to disorientation and disunity, and if you will, disillusionment when it comes to political goals. So ideology is lacking not only within the Amhara movement, but across the country, even though the PP is trying to come up with a new ideology and narrative. The guy who you just mentioned is, maybe we'll discuss about it. He came up with a new roadmap. It's not a book. It's a new roadmap. The so-called it's about narrative basically. So the PP has come up basically with a new grand narratives which must be imposed on each and every Ethiopians from various walks of life. I'm just saying it. So perhaps, as you said, even the ruling party is grappling with the lack of ideology. From the very beginning, they never had ideology, of course. But even they themselves are trying to make a mid-course change. I don't know whether that's going to work or not. So yeah, I agree with you. I'm just taking this as an example, even when the ruling party is trying to come up with something that they can sell to the political market. So where do we see this crisis within the Fano leading, and is there any way out of it, in your view?
Yeah, I think, let me just comment on the narrative. I heard an interview that Daniel Kibret was giving day before yesterday, and he wants to say, you're right, there was this Ethiopian ideology that came from Abiy, and it was always there, but we never picked up. I mean, it's just the most ignorant argument. When I was listening to his narrative, it was just repackaging the whole Medemmer and then saying, that's the only thing Ethiopians can use, nothing else in the world. The Medemmer, so it's very, very sad. I think, there are ways to really bring every group, all the groups together. I think I know there are several conversations going around, both in Washington, in Nairobi, in other places. I know a couple of groups who have tried to put together a proposal. No, you heard probably the transitional government debate. One of your colleagues have been touting, but I think there are other groups also that I understand, and they are just trying to find the right way to land that message and bring that argument to the forefront. But there is the recognition among several gurus and people who are learned, people who have a leg in the history of Ethiopia until now, that void is there. And unless you fill that void, you will leave the debate to people like the person you spoke, or some YouTubers who really try to disorient the people of Ethiopia at this point in time and say, let's stand with the government as long as it's trying to get us a port or this and that. And one of the YouTubers always mentions that by saying, I'll stand with the government, not knowing that these are all ploys and tactics for the regime to really disorient the people at this point in time. But there has to be conversations. I think there has to be, in my opinion, inclusive conferences and inclusive get together kind of thing. It might not happen in the coming 2 months, 3 months, but it has to be. And I think one issue that I think that you mentioned, I agree with you. Social upheaval may not happen tomorrow, but issues like this fester. So the government has either two options: either to leave issues faster until people like, closest people will desert it, like Gedu, Taib, and others, in which case, or hear the cries. And I tweeted the other day, hear the cries of the people and make some mitigation programs and mitigation measures to safeguard the interests of the people. They're not doing that. I don't expect them to do. And if that continues, so yeah, it's challenging for Fano and Ola, because the longer the armed struggle continues, the more fatigue, and with impoverishment and lack of access to your children's education and what have you, people kind of uh, lose interest. So you don't want that to happen. I think there has to be a rethinking of the Fano Ola armed, unarmed, single-handedly struggling against the government versus coalition creation. All this needs to be debated, and I think a serious debate must go around.
And what I'm expecting actually to be the outcome of this sustained dialogue among various groups would be a kind of a loose grand coalition, which I was talking about now and again. Then I mentioned that to Mr. Lidetu and others, even a year ago, even to Jawar, that there is a need now to leave other issues, political issues and interests behind, and form some forum, loose kind of grand coalition, which would pave the way, as we said, to rally around a single issue politics, because that's what I would expect, at least.
Yes, I totally agree with you. Totally.
If there is a will, of course. And that said, it is not in the nature of the PP government, let me put it bluntly, to blink. The PP regime would only blink when they are faced with pressures based on the past experiences. Maybe, as we said, they might be taking some mitigating measures already, or they are somehow having an inbuilt mechanism throughout the discussion, even with IMF people. But based on what we observed, Faisal, over the last 5-6 years, they blink, but when they do so, they would never do that out of volition or out of thinking that we have the responsibility towards the people. If that was the case, they should have consulted with the parliament. I remember you tweeted last time on Twitter X reading, which resonates with so many people. When you keep your own parliament in the dark and not talking to the people, to the stakeholders, and now saying that congratulations, everything is going to be okay. Now we have the dawn of the new era. And I don't think the PP will and is ready to take any corrective measures, but it is in their best interest to take those things seriously. I'm just making some remarks, Faisal, to bolster what you said. And with that brings us to the regional issue. I have only one question, which is the Ethiopia-Somalia relationship. We have been discussing these issues over the last 5-6 months with you, and always, whenever we meet, we always raise it. So I just need an update from you, whether the relationship have been improving or deteriorating over the last few weeks or months. Do we have any signal here?
Yeah, I think you can say that if there is any improvement in the relationship between the two, the harsh language that they used to exchange has been curtailed to the extent possible. Number two, I think there was a silver lining in the message that Prime Minister Abiy sent to the people of Somalia and President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud on the occasion of the terrorist act in Lido about a week ago, where about 30 plus, I think now they're talking about 37 people died. Both him and Foreign Minister Taye sent that condolences, and that was the first time. There is still no clear read as to whether Ethiopia would be part of the new repackaged deployment of troops for Somalia. As you know, yesterday and day before yesterday, Ethiopian troops are pulling out of the old positions because of the old mandate going on. The very fact that Egypt is already volunteered to bring its troops along with Djibouti and potentially some North African countries is a new factor, although Somalia always had relationship with Egypt. But that last issue is very concerning to Ethiopia. And on my book, Mogus, it is not, Somalia is not to be blamed. I think it is one of the money downgrading of the Ethiopian policies and politics that we have seen. Ethiopia was in the thick of Somalia's, affairs, whether one likes one way or another. It was presiding or hosting or helping some of the meetings. It had the largest army contingent for Somalia's, peacekeeping, and it was even more than any other country in the thick of Somali affairs. What happened? Why is today Ethiopia is not there and Egypt is probably the first one to say we are contributing? And I'm told that I'm not 100% sure and whether Ethiopia will join on both sides. Ethiopia will request to join or Somalia will accept. But the very fact that today you and I are sitting here in 2024 and talking about Ethiopia being excluded from its first neighbor, with whom it had great relationship with, until that stupid MOU that they signed, which misled millions of Ethiopians to some imaginary port that Ethiopia is supposed to be getting. Today, Ethiopia would have been the first one that will be sitting on the table for the repackaging of the last phase of Somalia's peacekeeping, and probably a new effort between Somalia and Ethiopia to talk about bilaterally, ports and other, collaborations. Abiy dropped the ball because of an infantile political gimmick that he played. Here is the country, you and I very much talked about this, even like 2 days after the MOU was signed, and I was in Nairobi, I recall. Ethiopia was known to be the house, and it still is the house of AU, before that OAU. Very took big pride in being protector of African sovereignty and a big player in the liberation of many African. Why would Abiy go to the extent of saying, I don't respect Somalia's sovereignty, no matter between Somalia and Somaliland? It's just the same thing that could happen tomorrow between Ethiopia and other region. The very fact that Egypt is coming to the region, I know the PP government will try to blame that on Somalia. Ethiopia needs to be blamed. Knowing what I know, knowing how Somalia wanted to stay close with Ethiopia, knowing that for the last 20 years, Ethiopia was very active in the affairs of Somalia. Sometimes very negative, but other times also very positive, because a lot of Ethiopians died inside Somalia against Al-Shabaab. Ethiopia lost the baton. It needs to regain that. And I think it needs to safeguard its good neighborly with Somalia. Because Ethiopia and Somalia will be tied at the hip as long as you have, close to 8-9 million Somalis living inside Ethiopia and claiming to be part of Ethiopia, its leaders. You cannot really afford to have bad relationship with Somalia. They need to rework that relationship.
Is there any developing news about the resumption of talk between Somalia and Ethiopia regarding the infamous memorandum of understanding? Maybe if you can end with that.
Yes, I think as you recall, the foreign minister of Turkey, Hakan Assad, was there in Addis about a week ago. He met with Prime Minister Abiy and Foreign Minister Taye. And initially, the two sides were supposed to meet the second time on September 2nd, but apparently September 2nd to September 10 is not convenient, as I understand, because of the fact that at the same time the General Assembly takes place in New York and some of them would be there. So the date has been moved forward and they will be meeting next week, early next week in Ankara again. This time, I think although I cannot say 100%, but I think the conversation that may take between the two sides would be a bit friendlier than what it was. in the first round. This time they may have more respect towards each other. They may or may not, and I cannot be quoted, but I'm breaking this news at your station that they will be meeting, at the earliest day of this coming week. And with that, I think there is hope that they may have more of a close proximity in terms of their conversation. Whether they will meet in person or not, I cannot tell, but the possibility is there.
Thanks so much, Mr. Faisal. It's always a pleasure talking to you. And thank you for your time, as always, to update us on the Ethiopian politics and that of the Horn of Africa. Let's hope for the best, and I will see you next time. Until then, thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Mogas. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
All right, can I go out?
Yes. So, ladies and gentlemen, it was our Ethiopia Today podcast. We tried to focus on the macroeconomic policy shift made by the Ethiopian government and its multifaceted ramifications. And we moved on to discuss about the Fano movement and what explains the crisis that befell the Amara political struggle and the way out of such quagmire, if there is any. And we have ended it with the Ethiopia-Somalia relationship, and Mr. Faisal Roble has claimed that the relationship is improving. Actually, they will be meeting next week to discuss about the potential agreement on the memorandum of understanding. With that, I would like to say thank you and goodbye. I will see you next time with Mr. Faisal or another guest with a different current issue. Thank you so much and have a good time.
የሐሳብ ገበታ ሐሳብ ያለ ልዩነት ሚዛናዊነት እንዲሁም በአሳታፊነት የሚንሸራሸርበት ቤት። በሐሳብ ገበታችን ወቅታዊ፣ ማህበራዊ፣ ፖለቲካዊ እንዲሁም የህግ ጉዳዮች በስፋት በጥልቀትና በአካታችነት ይቀርባሉ። የሳምንቱ እንግዳም የሳምንቱ በተጋባዥ ማህበረሰብ አንቂዎች፣ ፖለቲከኞች እንዲሁም ሙያተኞች የሚቀርቡበት ፕሮግራም። ወቅታዊ ጉዳይ፣ ወቅታዊ ሀገራዊ ጉዳዮች የሚዳሰሱበት ዝግጅት፣ የውይይትና የክርክር መድረክ። በተለያየ ጎራ የሚገኙ ታላላቅ ፖለቲከኞች፣ የማህበረሰብ አንቂዎች እንዲሁም ሙያተኞች በሐሳብ ዙሪያ ፊት ለፊት የሚወያዩበት ከዛም አልፎ የሚሟገቱበት ፕሮግራም። ህዝባዊ መድረክ በተለያዩ ጉዳዮች ላይ ሁሉም የሐሳብ ገበታ ቤተሰቦች በቀጥታ ሐሳባቸውን የሚያቀርቡበትና ተሳታፊ የሚሆኑበት ለቤተሰቦቻችን እድል የምንሰጥበት ጊዜም። እነዚህና ሌሎች ሳምንታዊ ፕሮግራሞችን ለእናንተ እናቀርባለን። ይህንን የተወደደ ቻናል ሰብስክራይብ በማድረግ ቤተሰብ ይሁኑ፣ በስፋት ተደራሽ እንዲሁም ለሌሎች ያጋሩም። የሐሳብ ገበታው እንዲጠናከር በተሻለ ጥራትና ስፋት ወደ እናንተ እንዲደርስ በሐሳቦ በሙያውና በገንዘቡ ይደግፉን። የሐሳብ ገበታን በሱፐር ቻት፣ በሱፐር ታንክስ እና በሱፐር ስቲከር አጋርነቱን ያሳዩን። በጎፈንድሚ አማራጭ የሐሳብ ገበታን ያበረታቱ። ስለ ሐሳብ አስተያየቶ እንዲሁም ድጋፎም እናመሰግናለን። ዓላማችን